Have you ever come home after work, sat in a quiet room, and thought about texting someone, only to put your phone back down? Your friends all seem busy, and you worry that reaching out first might bother them, so you just spend the evening alone. If this happens once in a while, it is no big deal. But when it happens every single day, things start to change. In the United Kingdom, 60% of people between the ages of 18 and 34 said they feel lonely. If 5 people are standing next to you, 3 of them feel lonely. In the United States, 46% of the entire population said they regularly feel lonely. That is almost 1 out of every 2 people. We live in a time when we can contact anyone instantly with a smartphone. So why are so many people feeling alone? Today, we are going to look at how loneliness is not just a feeling, but a biological function built into our bodies. We will explore how it changes our brain and body and what happens when isolation is pushed to its extreme. Let us get started. Before we dive in, there's one important thing to understand. Being lonely and being alone are not the same thing. Some people are perfectly happy by themselves. Others feel miserable even when they are surrounded by people. Loneliness is completely personal. If you feel lonely, then you are lonely. Someone who looks like they have tons of friends can still feel lonely on the inside. And here's something important. The idea that only people with poor social skills feel lonely is a common myth. Research conducted on large groups of people found that social skills have almost nothing to do with whether someone feels lonely or not. Wealth, fame, power, beauty, social skills, personality, none of these can protect you from loneliness. That is because loneliness is part of your biology. So what exactly is loneliness? Think of it like hunger. When you are hungry, your stomach growls and tells you it's time to eat. Loneliness works in a similar way. It's your body sending you a signal that you need people. Hunger is a signal to feed your body with nutrients. Loneliness is a signal to feed your life with human connection. The reason this function exists in our bodies goes back a very long time. Millions of years ago, our ancestors could not survive alone. Finding food, protecting themselves from dangerous animals, and raising children were all things that required people working together. This is where natural selection comes in. Natural selection means that living things with traits that help them survive are more likely to stay alive and pass those traits to their children. Because people who lived in groups survived far longer than those who lived alone, the desire to be around others became deeply wired into our bodies. That is why humans are born to maintain relationships with about 50 to 150 people. Think of it as about the number of kids in your entire grade at school. Being around other people is our natural state. Being together meant survival. Being alone meant death. Here's something fascinating. For our ancestors, the scariest thing was not being eaten by a lion. The truly terrifying thing was being kicked out of the group. Imagine everyone in your class playing together during recess, but you are standing alone on the side. That hurts, right? That pain is not random. Your body created it on purpose. It works as an early warning system. An early warning system is something that alerts you before danger arrives. Just like a fire alarm detects smoke before a fire breaks out, loneliness sends a signal before your relationships fall apart. Long ago, ancestors who felt this pain strongly were more likely to fix their behavior so they wouldn't get kicked out of the group. They stayed in the tribe and survived. On the other hand, ancestors who did not feel this pain much probably didn't change their behavior when the group pushed them away. They were left alone and most likely did not survive. That is why loneliness hurts. It has to hurt, so we take action. This system of connecting people to each other worked beautifully for most of human history, until people started building a new world for themselves. Loneliness was originally a natural function built into our bodies. So why are so many more people feeling lonely these days? The spread of loneliness as we know it today began in the late Renaissance. The Renaissance was a period in Europe when art and learning flourished. Starting in the later part of this era, Western culture began to emphasize the individual. Intellectuals rejected the collectivism of the Middle Ages. Collectivism means putting the group above the individual. In simple terms, the era of we before me was coming to an end. Around the same time, Puritan theology emerged, which also stressed individual responsibility. The idea that each person is responsible for their own life started to spread. These changes accelerated during the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was a period when machines were invented, factories were built, and goods became mass-produced. People left the villages and fields where they had lived together for generations and moved into cities with factories. Communities that had lasted for hundreds of years began to fall apart, and cities grew rapidly. Imagine people who used to see each other every day in the same village suddenly scattered in different directions. Just like how classmates naturally drift apart after graduation, people who left their villages lost touch with each other. As the world changed faster and faster, this only got worse. Today, we move long distances for new jobs, education, or love. In the process, we leave behind the friendships we have built. In the United States, researchers found that the average number of close friends a person had was 3 in 1985, but dropped to 2 by 2011. In just 26 years, people lost one of their closest connections. Why does this happen? Many people slide into chronic loneliness without even realizing it. Once you become an adult, your days are consumed by work, school, dating, raising kids, or just binge-watching shows. There is simply not enough time. The easiest thing to sacrifice is time with friends. You keep saying, "I'm too tired, let us meet next time," until one day you realize there is no one left to call. At that point, you may desperately want close relationships, but making close friends as an adult is not easy. This is how loneliness gradually becomes chronic. Chronic means it doesn't happen just once or twice, but continues for a long time. We think smartphones and artificial intelligence are truly amazing, but our bodies and minds are fundamentally the same as they were 500,000 years ago. 500,000 years is an unimaginably long time, yet our bodies have not changed. We're still wired to feel comfortable when we are with people and anxious when we are alone. The problem is that this loneliness is far more than just feeling a little down. According to large-scale research, the stress caused by chronic loneliness is one of the most harmful things a human can experience. When loneliness continues for a long time, stress hormones surge in our bodies. Stress hormones are chemicals our body releases when it senses danger. That pounding heart and sweaty palms you feel right before a test, that is caused by these hormones. A brief burst is fine, but when they keep flowing for a long time, they start damaging your body. Specifically, aging speeds up. Cancer worsens, dementia deepens, and the immune system weakens. Your immune system is the force that protects your body from illness. When it weakens, you can get sick more easily, even from something as small as a common cold. To put the harm of loneliness into numbers, it is twice as damaging as obesity and roughly as harmful as smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. Loneliness is not just feeling a little sad, it physically makes your body sick. But the scariest part is something else entirely. Once loneliness becomes chronic, it starts feeding on itself. How does that work? When you fall and scrape your knee, it hurts. Here is the surprising part. The emotional pain of being excluded from friends activates nearly the same area in the brain as physical pain. Our brain processes a hurt body and a hurt heart in almost the same way, so it treats both as danger signals and immediately activates defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are automatic responses where your body and mind try to protect you from harm. When loneliness goes on for a long time, real changes happen in the brain. There's a part of the brain called the limbic system. The limbic system handles emotions like fear and stress. That racing heartbeat you feel on a scary roller coaster, that's your limbic system reacting. When loneliness persists, this limbic system becomes hypersensitive. Meanwhile, another part called the prefrontal cortex can actually shrink. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for calm thinking and judging right from wrong. When you solve a math problem step by step, that's this part of your brain at work. So the part that handles emotions gets bigger, while the part that handles thinking gets smaller. Think of it like a smartphone where the notification sounds keep getting louder, but the screen keeps getting dimmer. When this happens, the brain enters a kind of self-protection mode. It starts searching for threats everywhere. You become much more sensitive to other people's facial expressions and tone of voice, but your ability to accurately interpret them actually drops. For example, a friend might just be staring blankly into space, but you interpret it as them being angry at you. The part of the brain that recognizes faces starts malfunctioning, reading neutral expressions as hostile ones. Over time, you begin to assume the worst whenever you try to figure out what someone else is thinking. When you start seeing the world this negatively, you wrap yourself up tighter to avoid getting hurt again. But from the outside, that looks cold, unfriendly, and awkward. You think you're protecting yourself, but to everyone else, you become someone who is hard to approach. Physical changes show up too. You lose your sense of time and start having trouble sleeping. You're more likely to experience a racing heart, headaches, dizziness, and heightened irritability. You may lose your appetite and start losing weight. Loneliness doesn't just hurt your heart, it reaches every corner of your body. So what happens when this kind of isolation is pushed to the absolute extreme? We have just seen how everyday loneliness can seriously affect your mind and body. But what happens when someone is forcibly locked away alone against their will? The clearest example of this is solitary confinement. Solitary confinement means locking a person in a very small room by themselves. As of 2019, more than 120,000 inmates in the United States were held in solitary confinement. The space they live in is roughly 2 to 3 meters wide. If you stretch both arms out, you could almost touch both walls. In these tiny rooms with no windows, they spend 22 to 24 hours a day. They are alone for nearly the entire day. This practice first began in the late 18th century. A religious group called the Quakers introduced solitary confinement to American prisons. Before that, prisons used physical punishment, like beatings. The Quakers believed this was a better alternative. They thought that sitting alone in silence would lead prisoners to reflect on what they had done. But the result was the opposite. People who were locked up alone only got worse. The famous writer Charles Dickens visited a solitary confinement facility and condemned it as worse than any physical torture. After that, the use of solitary confinement declined for a while. But in the 1980s, things changed again. New laws in the United States imposed harsher punishments for criminals, and the prison population exploded. As prisons became overcrowded, fights and violence among inmates increased. To control this, prisons began using solitary confinement again. The problem was that it was not just violent offenders who were sent to solitary. Even people who committed minor, nonviolent infractions, like talking back to a guard, were thrown in. When someone is forcibly isolated for an extended period, all the symptoms of loneliness we discussed earlier appear much faster and far more severely. Stress hormones skyrocket, the limbic system becomes extremely hypersensitive, and the prefrontal cortex shrinks. Thoughts become chaotic and emotional control breaks down. Some fall into depression or develop obsessive behaviors. In severe cases, people experience hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that do not exist. The United Nations, along with numerous human rights organizations and experts, classifies this kind of prolonged forced isolation as torture. The damage of solitary confinement doesn't end when someone leaves the cell. The effects last long after release. People who have experienced solitary are 3 times more likely to show symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder compared to regular inmates. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition where frightening memories keep coming back, leaving someone in a constant state of anxiety and fear. It is similar to how someone who has been in a car accident might feel terrified every time they see a car. People who have been in solitary often undergo personality changes, experience increased anxiety and paranoia in ordinary situations, and find it difficult to focus on or interact with other people. Some states have restricted solitary confinement for inmates with severe mental illness, children, and pregnant women. Other states have passed laws limiting solitary confinement to 15 to 20 days. But these laws are not always enforced, and prison authorities have found loopholes. Most importantly, solitary confinement has been shown to be ineffective in reducing violence within prisons. It doesn't fix people, it breaks them even further. Meanwhile, other countries have taken a completely different approach. Norway incarcerates far fewer people than the United States, but spends 5 times more per inmate on housing, classes, and work programs. As a result, Norway has one of the lowest reoffending rates in the world, meaning that people who leave prison actually reintegrate into society. It's a powerful example that helping people reconnect rather than isolating them is far more effective. We have now explored everything from how loneliness is a function built into our bodies, to how it changes our brain and body, to what extreme isolation does to a human being. So what can we do about it? If loneliness is starting to feel stronger in your daily life, the very first thing to do is to check whether you might be caught in a vicious cycle. The cycle of loneliness usually goes like this. First, feeling alone makes you tense and sad. Then you start remembering only the negative moments in your relationships. That time a friend was cold to you, or the time someone did not listen to your story. Focusing only on bad memories makes you think worse about yourself and about others. Then you start avoiding people altogether, and the isolation deepens. Each time this cycle repeats, it gets worse, and it becomes harder to break free. A friend asks you to hang out, and you say you are fine and turn them down. You sit apart from your classmates. When someone calls, you do not answer. Then others start thinking you want to be left alone. Eventually, nobody reaches out anymore. This process unfolds slowly over months or even years, and it can eventually lead to depression. You want human connection, but you can no longer have it. The very first step to breaking this cycle is accepting that feeling lonely is completely normal and nothing to be ashamed of. Loneliness is not embarrassing. Everyone goes through it at some point in their life. Just like you would never be embarrassed about feeling hungry, you do not need to be embarrassed about feeling lonely. You cannot erase this feeling or pretend it doesn't exist. But once you admit to yourself that you are lonely, you can start finding the causes and changing them one by one. Start by examining your thoughts. Ask yourself whether you have been focusing only on negative memories. Was what your friend said really meant to be hurtful? Or were they just busy and gave a short answer? Maybe they did not dislike you at all. Maybe they simply did not have enough time. Next, take a look at how you see the world. Have you been interpreting everything others do in the worst possible way? Have you been predicting negative outcomes before anything has even happened? Have you been assuming people do not want you around? Have you been closing yourself off because you're afraid of getting hurt? Finally, examine your own behavior. Have you been avoiding opportunities to be with other people? Have you been coming up with excuses every time someone invites you somewhere? Have you been pushing people away in the name of protecting yourself? There are also concrete things that can help. Building a healthy daily routine makes a real difference. Activities like exercising, reading, or writing, things that engage both your body and mind, are especially good. These activities help organize your scattered thoughts. Of course, every person's situation is different, and looking inward on your own may not always be enough. If you feel like you cannot work through it alone, reaching out to a professional is a great step. That's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of courage. Here's what today comes down to. Loneliness is not caused by a bad personality or a lack of social skills. It's a biological function that has been written into our bodies for millions of years. But modern society has made this function harder and harder to manage. When loneliness drags on, it changes your brain, hurts your body, and distorts the way you see the world. Extreme isolation can turn a person into someone entirely different. But if you recognize the cycle and take it one step at a time, things can change. The technology and civilization that humanity has created are truly remarkable. But in the end, what we need most is not technology. It is the person standing next to us. We'll be back next time with another fascinating science story you can use in your everyday life.